Welcome to another episode of Inside the Recording Studio. I am Jody Whitesides, and with me, as always, is Mr. Chris Hellstrom. How are you today, Chris?
I'm good. I'm laughing because I see what you did there, and it was very apropos for today's topic.
Well, you know, I do my best.
So
much as I
funny
can.
and quick-witted.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
What are we talking about today?
Vocal tuning.
Yes.
Pitching stuff. Should we do it? How hard we should do it? Should we do it all the time or not? So to tune or not to tune, as it were.
That is the question. Come on, Shakespearean mixers. Let's go.
Let's do it. What's your philosophy on tuning vocals?
I do it. That's my philosophy. I do it. I do it when necessary.
Yeah?
Yes.
That's a key phrase, though. When necessary, do you do it on individual phrases, or do you have baked into your workflow that, okay, it's time to tune the vocals?
Generally speaking, it's baked in to the workflow. I will run it through the system that I tend to use without touching the tuning to start, which means it's just analyzing the audio.
Okay.
Then once
so you're
the
already saying what you're using there, but we'll come to that later.
Sure. Well, but there's multiple plugins that do that.
That's
and there's
true.
multiple services that do it too. So it's not necessarily that I'm giving away exactly what I'm using. But the idea is that it's doing the analyzation. And once it's done the analyzation, I then make the determinative choice. That was a strange word to use. That it either needs it or it doesn't. And if it doesn't need it, I don't touch it, which means that I generally tend to do this shit by hand.
Yeah, okay. I mean, to let the cat out of the bag, that the technology you're using there is ARA, right, or ARA, right?
Yes.
Which has made this a lot simpler. But we'll touch on that down the line.
I did it prior to that, yes, but yes, it is still using ARA now.
Yeah, it's simpler now.
It is
to do it. Is the style dependent for you, or do you tend to always do that with any production that has vocals, obviously?
I'll go with not necessarily style dependent, but track dependent and individual track dependent, even finer grained on that. How about you?
Yes, I tend to do it if it needs it. And I find, I'm not sure if it's just my ear at this point, I find that just about anything needs some nudging. Unless I do work with some people that really know what they're doing, and this is not putting anybody down. If I work with somebody like yourself and you do vocals for either collaboration or something, I don't have to touch that because either it's performed really well or you've already done that kind of shit for me.
Handing it to you on a silver platter.
Yes, and it's very, very nice when you get to work with people that do that, which is awesome. Otherwise, which is most often the case, I would also go further that if it's a client that are not comfortable working with these tools, I would rather do it than they do it, because you can do more harm
than good
with these. Yeah.
Yes, you can.
Style dependent, I don't know. Yeah, I think it's always kind of baked in, but it is style dependent in the sense that I think if you're doing something, let's just say like a style that has more of a jazz influence and things, you get away with a lot more because it's sort of part of that, the performance, the emotional aspect. And I would say the same thing for like maybe some R&B or like old school R&B and things, where it can just sound too mechanical and too precise, and you can sort of squeeze out all the emotion out of it, I think.
Sure.
So in that case, I do think it's style dependent. One point that I wanted to raise, though, is because vocal tuning is so prevalent in pop today.
Oh, I think it's prevalent well beyond pop, though.
Yeah, it's everywhere, right? Maybe even just saying like current music. Is that forcing us to be more aware of this, or are we just used to now to hear perfectly tuned vocal all the time? Because if we go back and listen to older stuff, our ear wouldn't go like, oh, he's a little sharp on this syllable. But now we might. So we react to it in a different way. So do you think that is making us more precious perhaps with having a vocal 100% in correct pitch, or is it just a good thing to have this?
Sign of the times. That's what I'll go with. It's a sign of the times.
Do you think that will change?
Yeah, I do. Over time, I do believe it'll change. I don't know if it will always be hip or cool to tune everything, so to speak. That being said, there's a good prevalence of people that aren't great singers, that tuning them makes them sound reasonable. And there are people that are not great singers that tuning them makes them sound unreasonable, but they sound just great, so to speak, without the tuning.
Yeah.
Does that make sense with what I'm saying there?
And I think that's in the delivery, right?
It is. It's a lot in the delivery, and it's a lot in the character of the person's voice. If you have a great singer, they may not need the tuning based on their control or whatever it is on their delivery, but if there's something that is slightly off, it is so much easier to deal with somebody that already sounds good and just making a minor tweak. The same can't be said for people that don't sound good without it. That would be the way I would posit on that question.
Yeah, I think the delivery is always the most important thing.
Yes.
Right. So if you have the vibe there and you have it's just it's slightly flat on that high note or whatever. Mm-hmm. I know we have colleagues that have different opinions on this. I would rather have that and then just bring that up, those extra 10 cents in a tune or whatever. That's not a problem for me.
If it's needed, sure.
If it's needed, of course. Yeah. Going back to sort of modern singer, if you will, it's kind of weird that every once in a while you hear somebody do a performance, and while they're learning how to sing, they're almost emulating like the byproducts and artifacts of what Autotune can do.
Sure.
I'm not sure that's a good development.
Well, here's another portion to what I'm thinking in terms of this. I will be more inclined to get another take out of the vocalist than I would be to just say, let's just fix it in post.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
I'm not that lazy. And I dislike working with people that are that lazy.
Yeah, if it's just, no, I don't want to try that again, just tune it, then yes, that's an issue.
That's right? A person that doesn't get called back again. To me.
There is that. Yeah, and that might sound harsh, but that's just a work ethic thing. I think most singers, just like any other instrumentalist, you like to have that pride in your work where you obviously do your best and try again, as it were.
Right.
I'm with you there. Another take is always preferable than to just tune something.
Yeah. With that being said, do you prefer not having to tune or working with people that you have to tune?
Which
is a weird question. Yes,
right? Yes, I would prefer not to have to tune anybody. Yeah, what are you talking about? Yeah, definitely.
Of course.
Yeah, it sounds so absurd when you're saying it because we have these tools that we can do, and they do a good job these days, right? The tools that we have, they can make it really transparent. Mm-hmm. Just because we have them doesn't mean that they should always be part of your workflow if it's not needed.
Well, but I already just said that I have it baked into my workflow. It doesn't always get used, but it's kind of baked in there.
Right, but that's what I mean. It's like if you have a vocalist that has an amazing voice and they can sing in time and in pitch with emotion, mm-hmm. That's ideal.
It is.
That's
the golden bar right there that has just been set.
Yeah. So let's say that if we take the tuning of vocals out of it, mm-hmm. How much would you allow it to be out of tune or not in correct pitch, but the delivery and the emotion is there and it's obviously appropriate for the type of music that you're doing? Do you have some sort of give and take there, or is it just... Okay, what's that?
If it is close, but the feel and the delivery is there, the pitch tools are good enough now you can pull it.
Right. But do you ever leave it?
That is highly dependent upon the rest of the arrangement and how it sounds harmonically speaking.
Okay. So do you have an example there of anything, or is it just so dependent that you'd have to hear a sound?
It's something you'd have to hear. And I will go so far to say that there was a point, I'm probably 12 years ago at this, where I was mixing a track. And there was one particular little spot in this track that was just driving me bonkers because the vocal was in tune, the instruments were in tune, but something was harmonically clashing. And it wasn't the wrong note.
That's
what it ended up being, and this is crazy, the hi-hat was hit in such a way that the hi-hat was actually clashing with the harmony. And it was driving me berserk. And I ended up having to automate an EQ move on the hi-hat to automate the value of that weird harmonic that came out of it, out of the mix. That's how anal I can get about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think to cycle back here on, we're so used to hearing everything in tune today. My way of dealing with that is always, when you know something isn't right, you hear it right away. Mm-hmm. And if you leave it to an extent where it's like, this is going to bug me every time I hear this song.
That's why I had to automate an EQ on that hi-hat for that one particular hit. That's how crazy that was. It would bug me every time.
Right. Yeah. Another thing, of course, with tuning, we're not tuning vocals here, is creative uses. Mm-hmm. And I think the first time, well, I think anybody heard that Cher, do you believe in life after love?
Yes.
Because I could be wrong here, but I believe that was sort of a mistake that the engineer did just to show, like, this is where we're going to go kind of thing. And she was like, no, that sounds awesome. Let's leave that,
Yeah.
And
it's kind of like the in-the-air drums. That was a mistake, too. And then it's like, oh, no, that's cool. Let's leave it.
Right.
So mistakes happen that are cool. And this is, as you're exempling here, I do recall that. And it was, wow, that's an interesting effect. And it came straight out of Autotune, actually, from Antares.
Yeah. I remember I was speculating, so what is that? Is that a vocoder? What is that? But it was actually Autotune. It was like just pulling that right into pitch. And then, of course, it became known as like the T-Pain effect. And then for a while there, you couldn't hear a song on pop radio type of thing that didn't
or hip-hop
utilize
for that matter.
Right. Yeah. It can be creative uses, and sometimes we stumble upon those, but I wonder how much of that was, intentional artifacts, or if it's just singers that were really, really bad and that just what it became, right?
I think it's a combination of both.
Yeah.
To actually get that effect to happen is not the easiest thing in the world. I tried to do it a few times, and it was miserably hard. But then again, I'm so used to singing in tune already as it is. But to sing that far out of tune to get it to do it is not the easiest thing in the world.
Yeah.
So I think it's a combination of both. For people that can sing and to make it happen, it's harder. For those that can't sing, it might be a little bit easier. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And with that, let's take a word from our sponsors. And we're back. We're going to delve into a little bit of the process of tuning vocals at this point. Kick it off.
Well, the way I would look at this is, I guess there's a couple of different ways you could do it, but do you start and I know the answer to this as I'm asking you, but do you do the tuning pre or post comping?
The answer to that question is post-comping. What about you? Do you do it pre or post?
Yeah, always post.
Yeah.
It's just, why would you not do that? I mean, it sounds dumb when you're saying it. I would always make sure that I have the best takes. And if there are tuning issues that are sort of making the choices for me while I use one take or another, what will override that to me would be if I have one take that has a great emotional aspect to it, but not there in pitch.
Right.
And another one that is pitch, but it has a little bit of a weaker delivery.
Yep.
The stronger take with pitch issues will win out for me, because that I can fix.
Yes.
I would much rather have an emotional performance and tweak some pitches.
Me. You really like me. Sorry.
Because it's easier to fix. You can't inject, emotion, right? There's only so much distortion you can add before it starts.
You hear that,
going.
Eventide? You got a new plugin you got to make. Or anybody else out there that makes plugins. You need the emotion plugin now.
The emotionizer, yeah. But I mean, jokingly on that, you can inject a little bit of emotion by adding subtle harmonics and things. But that's not what we're talking about today. That's how I go about doing my choices. What about you, though? I'm assuming it's the same way.
I do my comping first. And for those that aren't 100% sure of what comping is you have multiple takes of whatever it is that you're doing, and certain DAWs will allow you to easily pick the best parts. With Logic, it's the folder concept, and you can swipe the best parts with your mouse and make all those pieces fit together fairly seamlessly. Other DAWs can do the same thing. I'm using Melodyne's ARA, giving it away at this point.
You want to explain that a little bit, maybe, what that technology actually allows you to do, if somebody doesn't know?
Yes. ARA is a real-time type of audio manipulation, and it was created by Celemony. And the first DAW to actually implement it was Studio One. And the crazy thing is that I believe they developed it with Apple and Logic, but it wasn't the first DAW to do it. That's my understanding. And there's other companies. Logic, there were issues with Logic, and on top of that, there are other companies that are now using the ARA technology, but had issues with the implementation because Apple wasn't doing it correctly. So why Celemony was getting it right with Logic most of the time prior to other companies is a mind-boggling issue. But now other companies are making use of ARA as well. That requires your pitch correction plugin to be the first thing in a channel strip slot. The nice thing is instead of creating some extra folder wherever you're recording your audio to input the analyzed audio of whatever it is that you're tuning and keeping a separate audio file, it actually includes it, in the case of Logic, inside the DAW file. So you're still making
your session folder.
It still resides within the DAW file, but it's not in a separate folder somewhere. It's literally inside the DAW file. It's still creating an additional audio track for whatever it is that it's analyzing, but it's not quite the same thing as doing an entire pass of every single track that you've recorded in your vocal comps, where you had to do it one at a time. Now it does everything lickety split. It's a lot faster, and it just balloons the size of your DAW file. All well and good. I do all of my tracking and editing in Logic. I don't mix in Logic anymore, but that's where I do my tracking and editing. I'm just too fast with it there. The nice thing about ARA in Logic with this is that it analyzes every file in a comp folder. So I don't have to worry about doing multiple passes on it. It's already in there. Since I've already comped it, I know that if I wanted to switch something out just to hear the difference on it, it's real quick and easy. I don't have to do an extra step anymore or extra multiple steps to do it. Studio One, being the first to implement it, not only did they do Celemony's Melodyne, they also implemented SynchroArt's Vocaline. It works with the timing. Now, in Logic, you don't get the benefit of using multiple things doing ARA at once. That's still a fucking headache. Because you can't do both there.
Right. The workaround that I do for that is doing the comping first, then timing corrections, which hopefully are minor, because again, there would be a different take, would be better. Then I would do that using FlexTime or something.
Right.
What I would then have to do is, because FlexTime and ARA can't live at the same time.
Right.
Bounce that track, so I have a time-corrected track. Then for the next track, go in and do the ARA on that one. The ARA was really cool because it just listens and does it offline, as it were. It's a fast process where the initial versions of Melodyne, which is what I use as well, you'd have to, for all intents and purposes, record it into Melodyne.
Right,
track.
and
You have to
save
do
it into
real
a
time.
separate folder and the whole deal, which becomes a hassle because if it gets lost and Melodyne can't find it, you're fucked.
Yeah, well, you have to do all your edits again, which could be, depending on how much you have to do, it's very time consuming. And also the cryptic file names that they would do in a completely different folder. And it was like, what is this? I got like 18 gigs of something in a Melodyne folder, and you had no idea what they were, so you could never delete anything.
Right. Well, that's why when I had that issue with Melodyne, I was creating per project folders for Melodyne, so I could at least keep them in the same project. I have the same issue currently with Luna. Luna just gives arcane file names that make 0 sense outside of Luna. But both of us tend to do all the comping first and then do whatever corrections need to be done after for vocals.
Yeah. And one thing that I think is important to bring up here, or advisable to bring up at least, that is because most of these have an automatic option of tuning, doesn't mean that you should rely on it 100%, in my opinion, because sometimes it can analyze and do it wrong, and sometimes the things that get corrected just don't sound right.
I concur with that 100%. Use your ear. The bigger problem with that is whether or not somebody has an ear if they're being a mixer. Some mixers don't have that harmonic sense, and that's nothing against them. It's just that would be unfortunate, relying too heavily on the technology.
And the same thing goes if you've been sitting and you've been editing vocals for multiple hours.
Take a break.
Like, yeah, take a break. Because I've had cases where I come back and it's like, what the heck was I listening to? This is way off, you know. But going in and using that to not just tune with your eyes, right, and values, just do it by ear and
make mistakes. You might get a T-Pain effect.
Yeah, don't just trust what the value readout says. Like, if it sounds good in the intended note, then that's good. And also, I would caution against when we're tuning to tune just to the key of the song or whatever.
Yeah.
Sometimes if the melody is calling for something where if they sound good, just leave them alone. It doesn't matter if you're in a minor key, but it's the major third it shows, right? If it sounds good, just leave it alone. I think it just helps with making it sound more and more natural, I guess, when you're doing this. So
provided that's what you want and you need it for your genre of whatever it is you're doing. What are some of the tools? We've named a couple throughout here.
We named a couple. Well, Melodyne to me is the big dog, probably because I'm a fan and I've been using it since version 1.
It's been around for a while. But it's not the first.
No, it's not the first. Autotune, I think, was first. Like
on Terry's,
yeah, Autotune. And that's why, it's almost like a verb now, right?
Well, it is. It's like Kleenex or Xerox.
Well, that was like, has this been photoshopped or have you auto-tuned the vocals? Yeah, so there is that. You mentioned repitch.
I did.
Which also has the other tool, which is really cool that I haven't worked with, but with Vocaline. I think it's called at the time.
Yes.
Yeah. Which is another process entirely, but when you're doing like BVs and things like backing vocals.
Tons of background vocals, or you're trying to match up in production, post-production, if you're doing the synchronization of somebody speaking a line in a TV or film or whatever video, and you have to ADR it, as they call it, you can perfectly match it to the original using Vocaline, which is really astounding technology.
Right. And especially if you're doing like massive sort of like Mutt Lange or pop backing vocals
tracks,
to get them to do that.
That's stacks
amazing.
And stacks. Yeah.
Actually, let me pull in another question here that I wanted to ask you. When it comes to backing vocals, how do you deal with those as tuning? Do you tend to be more friendly with slight pitch changes there, or are you going the same type of mentality?
It depends. It's more genre dependent on that. Pop often usually requires extreme precision. So you're going to hammer the living shit out of it, so to speak, to really make it fit. Because you've got it also depends on how many vocal tracks you're doing. I've had songs where there's been upwards of like 80 tracks of vocals. And that starts to become really messy if you don't have one great vocal technique with whoever's doing all those singing. On the flip side, with giant productions of that nature and people's laissez-faire attitudes, generally speaking, it's not always that way. But when you want to compare to something like Bohemian Rhapsody, which was done in a time frame that didn't have Autotune, those guys sang that stuff over and over and over and over again with a talent level that is astounding in that regard, because it's all very generally quite tight and in tune to the arrangement that's going on. But with things being in more tighter tuning now, and oftentimes where grooves are more set with rhythmic values, timing becomes a huge issue when things don't smear properly, so to speak.
Yeah.
And when you start correcting one thing, you correct another sometimes. So for me, I've used both vocal line and pitching to correct massive stacks of backing vocals so that they sound ginormous, but at the same time, super tight.
To me, the key thing there is the timing, because that tends to stick out more to me than...
Well, especially if there's sharp consonants to a word being sung or spoken.
Sure. I make sure that everything starts and stops and has the same sort of rhythmic delivery on all of that. I don't mind as much if there are minor, very small pitch changes possibly in between takes, because that can just, it's
well, that
almost
adds
like,
to depth. And I'll explain that there are moments where things might be in perfect tune already without having touched them. And I might take it and detune one of the vocals just a slight bit just to give that additional depth. So I'm taking something out of tune just to make it sound a little bit more harmonically pleasing.
Yeah, it's a bit like detuning one oscillator on a synth type of thing. It just makes it a little bit bigger. But keyword there's small amounts.
Right.
Like, so
to continue on with other things that help us tune our stuff, Waves Tune, Slate Meta Tune, and M Auto Pitch by Melda Production. Plus, most DAWs these days do come with built-in pitch correctors of some sort that can be used in some way, shape, or form. Kicking off the ending here. Well, what were you going to ask?
No, I was going to say, your go-to, you mentioned two there, but do you have a preference, Melodyne or the repitch?
Right now, I'm more inclined to grab Melodyne. I have repitch, I have vocal line, I have the stuff that comes in Logic as well. I am ultimately most familiar with Melodyne. There are aspects to repitch that I really enjoy, but at the same time, I've got 6 of one, half dozen of the other. I've got multiple choices, so it doesn't really matter.
Spoiled for choice.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, if you were given a stereo file of backing vocals that are harmonized, you can actually retune some of that or pitch correct some of that in Melodyne, because it does that.
Well, it's Melodyne
polyphonic.
DNA. There should be you have to have the stipulation that Melodyne has a level called DNA, and it's a more expensive version that allows you to do that.
Right, which is absolutely fantastic.
Yes, well, I know based on experience that I've asked you to use your Melodyne DNA to retune instruments other than vocals, one in particular, a guitar. Because the guitar in and of itself was not properly intonated. And the performance was there, but the value of the harmony being played sucked ass. So I had you tune it.
I mean, I remember that, where it's just, you know, there are chords ringing out. We're not talking about single notes here, right? But there are chords ringing out. When they're playing a chord in a certain position of the neck, the intonation was such that it made the chord sound out of tune.
It made it sound like shit,
Well, but thanks to Melodyne, boop, there you go.
Fix
Everything
that.
nice and in tune. Excellent. So lastly, I guess we talked about the guitars. Is there anything else that you like to tune, just as a quick note to kind of round this up?
Bass.
Yeah.
I will tune bass if it is overtly problematic. Now, have I tuned other things? Yes, I've tuned snares. I've tuned kick drums. I've tuned guitars. I've tuned...
Wait, you tune your guitars? No.
Well, yeah, right?
Yeah.
No, I'm post-recording.
Yeah.
I've tuned...
I'm the same way. The
other thing,
if there
I've
is
tuned
one,
a sousaphone.
As one does.
As one does, yeah. I mean, it's a crazy thing to tune, but it needed it, so I did it.
Yeah. No, bass is another one that can be important because it's just obviously the foundation and things. And I've found that depending on the intonation again, things can leave a little bit to be desired and it pokes out tremendously when it's not. And it could be just if a player is a little bit too aggressive and accidentally bends notes and things when they're fretting. So, and that's not even talking about fretless basses. So,
all right. Well, speaking of things poking out, let's move on to our Friday finds. Chris, what have you got today?
I got 2 today. 2. Because you have done 2 in the past, so I'm doing 2 today.
Right.
Because very apropos, I just learned that the aforementioned Antares Pro, they got version 10 now, is now ARA2 compatible.
Well, how about them apples?
Right? So I thought that's at least worth a nod and a tip of the hat. But the other thing that I also wanted to mention was when we're talking about restoring files or repairing files, at least I think, well, there's really only one big dog in town, right? And that's RX, iZotope,
right?
Which is fantastic suite. Does that? I don't know how they do all that math, but it's good. Yeah. But there's another company called Wave Arts, a little bit lesser known, but do great plugins, and they have now a master restoration suite, which does a similar job, like repairing crackles and pops and rumbles and hums, that type of thing. There's another option there for people, and I think they're doing a sale as of the recording of this podcast. I thought that was at least worth a mention because that's kind of cool. When there's another one doing it, competition is always good, right? So what do you got for us?
I'm looking at also on the subject of pitching things, Synchro Arts, and it's been mentioned in the podcast in and of itself, has repitch. And they are about to come out with a new update of it, as far as I know. It should be relatively soon. I'm looking at repitch.
Well, very cool.
Yeah,
it's
baby.
All about the pitching today, man.
While we've got your attention, we ask that you go to InsideTheRecordingStudio.com and sign up for our mailing list. Doing so will get you weekly reminders about the Tuesday tips when they come out, and we'll make sure that you don't miss any future episodes of the podcast. Send us an email at goldstar, GOLDSTAR, at InsideTheRecordingStudio.com with the word tune, not like cartoon, but waves tune. And you'll get something cool back in your inbox. If you have a topic or suggestion for Chris and I to explain in a future episode, contact us at the contact page, and we'll put it into consideration for a future episode. With that, I'll say, see you next week.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Have a good one, Jody.